On the night before Thanksgiving, 1971, a commercial airliner cruised through freezing rain over the Pacific Northwest. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, a man in a business suit and loafers walked to the back of the plane, lowered the rear staircase into the open sky, and jumped. He had $200,000 in cash strapped to his body. He had no radar, no radio, no way for anyone on the ground to know exactly where he came down, and he was never seen again. No body, no parachute, no confirmed trace of the man himself. Just a name he made up on the spot. Dan Cooper, mistakenly reported by the press as D.B. Cooper, and a case so strange it remains the only unsolved commercial airline hijacking in American history. For more than 50 years, investigators, amateur sleuths, and journalists have chased this man across 4 states, through hundreds of suspects and into one dead end after another. He is, to this day, a ghost. And what makes it even stranger is that he handed a flight attendant a note claiming he had a bomb, then spent the next several hours acting almost polite about it. From the very first minute of this case, nothing about D.B. Cooper made sense. And even today, nobody knows who he was. Before we continue, comment below. What do you think really happened to D.B. Cooper? To understand how a man could pull this off in broad daylight, you have to understand the world he was operating in. The early 1970s were the golden age of American skyjacking. Between 1961 and 1972, the country saw well over 100 hijackings. Airport security as we know it, metal detectors, ID checks, and baggage screening didn't exist yet. You could walk up to a counter, pay cash, and board a plane under any name you wanted. That's exactly what the man calling himself Dan Cooper did. On the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, he approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport. Middle-aged, calm, unremarkable. Witnesses would later describe him as a white man in his mid-40s, approximately 6 feet tall, with dark hair and brown eyes, dressed in a dark business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, and a raincoat. He paid in cash for a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a short 30-minute hop north to Seattle. Nobody at the counter thought twice about him. Nobody had any reason to. Cooper boarded the Boeing 727 carrying a black attaché case and a paper bag. He took a seat near the back, ordered a bourbon and soda once the plane was airborne, and lit a cigarette. For a few minutes, he was just another business traveler on a short evening flight. Then he passed a folded note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a phone number. Men did that sort of thing, and slipped it into her pocket without reading it. Cooper leaned toward her and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened it. The handwritten message told her he was hijacking the plane. When she sat beside him as instructed, Cooper opened his attaché case just enough to show her the contents. A tangle of wires and reddish cylinders that looked, to her, exactly like dynamite. He calmly laid out his demands: $200,000 in $20 bills and 4 parachutes waiting for him on the ground in Seattle. The flight crew relayed the message to air traffic control. From that moment, an ordinary Thanksgiving Eve flight became a slow-motion crisis, circling for nearly 2 hours over Puget Sound, while authorities scrambled to gather the ransom. And through it all, witnesses would later say, Cooper stayed strangely composed, polite to the crew, even offering the flight attendants a tip from the loose bills in his pocket, which they declined. If you were one of those flight attendants, calmly sitting a few feet from a man claiming to have a bomb, would you have known something was this wrong, this fast? When Flight 305 finally landed in Seattle that evening, Cooper's demands were waiting. He allowed all 36 passengers to leave the plane in exchange for the money and the parachutes. He kept a skeleton crew on board: the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and one flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, and ordered the plane back into the air, this time toward Mexico City, with a refueling stop planned in Reno. He gave the crew very specific instructions for how the plane should fly. Low altitude under 10,000 feet, flaps partially down, landing gear extended, cabin unpressurized. It was, investigators would later realize, exactly how you'd configure an aircraft if you intended to jump out of it. Somewhere over the dense, freezing forests of southwest Washington, a little after 8 p.m., Cooper strapped the money to his body, made his way to the rear stairway of the 727, and lowered it into the open night air. The crew, sealed off in the cockpit, felt a sudden pressure change and a jolt in the tail of the aircraft. They didn't see him go. When the plane finally landed, Cooper was gone. No parachute, no cash, no man, just an empty rear staircase swinging in the wind. The FBI opened a case they called NORJAK, short for Northwest Hijacking, and it would go on to become one of the longest-running investigations in the Bureau's history. Agents scoured the aircraft for prints and DNA. They interviewed the crew extensively. They pulled the serial numbers of every $20 bill handed over in Seattle, hoping the money would surface somewhere and lead them straight to Cooper. Ground and air searches combed the forest south of Mount St. Helens for weeks. Investigators used flight data to estimate where Cooper likely left the aircraft, a stretch of wilderness near the small town of Ariel, Washington, close to an artificial lake called Lake Merwin. They found nothing. No parachute, no remains, no trace of a man who, according to the physics of the jump, should have landed somewhere in that forest. Some clues did stand out, though. He'd left behind his black tie, which decades later would provide investigators with a partial DNA profile. He knew enough about the aircraft to demand the specific flap and altitude configuration needed to jump safely, suggesting some familiarity with aviation. But he'd also improvised, cutting apart a parachute with a pocket knife to fashion a strap for the money bag, and had unknowingly grabbed a parachute that had been sewn shut for training purposes, useless if he needed it. By the case's 5th anniversary, the FBI had considered more than 800 suspects. All but a couple of dozen were eliminated. Cooper himself was never among them. At this point, what do you think happened to him? He died in the jump. He survived and disappeared. He had help on the ground. Something else entirely. Comment on your theory below. Over 5 decades, a handful of theories have dominated the case. This is the theory most FBI investigators have leaned toward over the years. Cooper jumped at night into freezing rain over dense forest, wearing a business suit and loafers rather than any protective gear. He used a parachute that couldn't be steered. He'd unknowingly taken the non-functional reserve chute. Everything about his equipment and preparation suggested someone who was improvising, not a trained skydiver executing a plan. If that's true, his body and the money may still be somewhere in that wilderness, or may have washed into the river system that eventually carried some of the cash downstream. Others believe Cooper's calm, methodical behavior throughout the hijacking, his knowledge of the aircraft, and his specific technical demands point to a man who'd planned his escape carefully and knew exactly what he was doing. Under this theory, he landed successfully, buried or hid the money, and quietly rebuilt a life under a new identity. Hundreds of names have been floated over the years. A paratrooper turned airline worker who suddenly had cash for a house, a Vietnam veteran with a history of fraud, and a documented flair for the dramatic, even a relative allegedly overheard confessing to family. None of these leads have ever been confirmed with hard evidence, and every one of the most prominent suspects has since died without a definitive answer. Each theory explains part of the case. None of them explain all of it. Money from the river. For 9 years, the case went cold with no physical evidence at all. Then in February 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the Columbia River, north of Portland, when he uncovered 3 decaying bundles of $20 bills. The serial numbers matched Cooper's ransom money exactly. It was the first, and to date the only, confirmed physical trace of the hijacking ever found outside the aircraft itself. For a moment, it looked like the case might finally break open. Instead, it deepened the mystery. The discovery site was miles from where investigators believe Cooper had landed, raising new questions about how the money got there and whether it had simply drifted downstream or been buried there deliberately. Decades later, a scientific analysis of microscopic algae found on the bills suggested something even stranger. The money hadn't entered the water in November 1971 at all, but likely months later in the following spring. Exactly how it got there and why remains unexplained. To be honest, do you think this case will ever truly be solved? Why or why not? The FBI formally suspended the active investigation of the case in 2016, redirecting its resources elsewhere after 45 years without a resolution. It remains officially the only unresolved commercial hijacking in the history of American aviation. Amateur investigators, journalists, and true crime communities continue combing through old evidence, chasing new leads, and proposing new suspects to this day. Every so often, a new name surfaces with a compelling story attached to it. So far, none has held up. For the flight crew and passengers who lived through that night, the case never fully closed either. Many spent decades being asked the same question over and over. What was he really like? Their answer has stayed remarkably consistent, calm, quiet, and oddly courteous for a man who claimed to be holding a bomb. The Cooper case endures not because of what we know, but because of everything we don't. A man walked onto a plane, invented a name, threatened dozens of lives, and vanished into the sky without a trace, and more than 50 years later, that's still essentially all we can say for certain. Somewhere in an old case file, or maybe in the silt of a riverbank, or maybe nowhere at all, the truth about who he was is still out there. Whether anyone will ever find it is another question entirely. If you had to solve this case yourself, where would you start? Share your first move in the comments. If this case fascinated you as much as it fascinates us, do us a favor. Like this video, subscribe to Crime Vault, turn on notifications so you never miss a case. We post new true crime mysteries every week, unsolved disappearances, cold cases, and real investigations that are still waiting for an ending. Because some stories never really conclude, they just fade into legend.